Hi, Ellen. How are you doing today?
Hey Rob, how are you?
Good.
It actually tried to snow here today.
Oh, is that early?
Well, no, there's no pattern anymore.
Uh,
It's kind of like saying, did the hurricanes come early this year?
mm,
Who knows?
All right. Well, it's 5:30. Few people in the waiting room. I will let them in and probably give it a few more minutes to see if others join in before we get started. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is the Envision West Broadway Master Plan virtual public engagement session on the final draft plan. We'll give it a few more minutes to let other people join in before we get started. Just so you know, presentation is being recorded and it will then be posted to the project website. So those that aren't able to attend this afternoon in person or live can watch it at their convenience. Well, good afternoon. I think we have about several people in the audience listening in. We'll wait maybe just 2 more minutes or so to see if some of the other people that registered join on. So if you don't mind, just holding on a couple more minutes before we go ahead and get started. See just a couple people signing in, so we'll give them just another moment to finish logging in, and then I'll get started. I don't want to keep us over time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And if others join in along the way, we can go ahead and catch them up. I think it'll be a relatively smaller group today, and so we can keep it a little more informal than some of the past meetings. Just so you know, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the project website. So those that aren't able to watch it live can watch it at their convenience. And again, thank you for joining this afternoon. This is the Envision West Broadway Master Plan and the virtual public engagement session for the final draft of the plan. Again, the meeting is being recorded. We may do some live polling. We have just a few people in the audience listening in, but it still might be interesting just so we get a better idea of who's in the room. So we have that in our records just for, just to know. So have your cell phones ready. If you participated in one of these meetings before, you're probably familiar with this. If not, we'll go over it when we get there. And I'd just like to welcome everyone to our meeting this afternoon. My name is Rob Pietkowski, town planner and urban designer with Dover Cole and Partners. It's a pleasure to be here with you all again, and looking forward to presenting this updated draft of the master plan for West Broadway area, and to get your thoughts on the edits that have been made, how we've been responding to updated input, and just to give you an update on the project since we last met. Right, so we'll start off with some welcome and introductory remarks. I think we're a small group here, so we could probably just quickly go through this. And then I'll talk about the project timeline, give a presentation and update on the plan, how it's evolved, where we stand today. Then we can open it up to a review and discussion, followed up by a wrap up and next steps towards the approval process. So I think we'll start with Annette and then Ellen.
Great, welcome everybody. I'm Annette Marchessault. I'm a project manager with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and I've been the project manager for this project on this end.
Excuse my bumbling. I'm Ellen Buchanan. I'm the director of the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. We have been the lead agency on this, and Annette has done a wonderful job of managing it along with assistance from Dover Cole and Missoula Downtown Partnership / Business Improvement District. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rob.
Okay. Thank you, Annette and Ellen. We just have we have a relatively small group here. So what I'd like to do, if you're comfortable, is quickly run down the list. If you can just quickly introduce yourself and just, maybe 30 seconds, 20 seconds, and your name and what brought you here tonight. We'll go down the list as it appears on my screen. So start off with Aaron, and then Amy, and then KB Brown. You should be able to unmute yourself.
All right, I'm here. I'm KB, and I live actually in the Clark Fork Commons in the West Broadway block. I'm also an advocate for the river in downtown Missoula, and just here tonight to check the plan out, and pretty excited about everything going on. And this is why I bought my place 12 years ago, was kind of had an idea that this would be an up and coming part of town, and just want to be part of the process.
Great. Thank you.
I can jump up in now. Hi, I'm Aaron Hopp. I live in the same complex there as KB, and just excited to see where all of this preparation and planning is going in terms of fruition. And I appreciate all the input that you all have taken in this planning process. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy O'Hoyt. I am a homeowner in the West Side, basically kind of the Phillips and Scott Street intersection there across from Lowell School. I'm also an active member in CREW, which is a community organization for the West Side and North Side. And I've just been following along this process with them, and excited to see the developments this evening.
Thank you, Amy. Next, we'll do Matthew and Reed, and then Rowana.
Yeah, I'm Matthew LaRubio, one of the owners over at Western Cider. I'm not able to be here for the full meeting, but looking forward to seeing what the current updates are and hear some of the input.
Thank you.
I'm Reed. I organize with CREW, and I'm here to make sure that our unhoused neighbors have some say in this process. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ro. I am a renter on the north side and a member of North Side West Side CREW. And yeah, similar to Reed, I'm just here to hear kind of where things are at, and also just someone really, I worked right in that area for the last 10 years, and just want to make sure that we're also considering folks who are unhoused as our neighbors and a part of this process. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's see. And we have Sam, Yes, and Bill.
Hi, Sam Duncan, pronouns they, them, and I'm a community organizer with North Missoula Community Development Corporation. And also I organize with these amazing neighbors in the North Side, West Side CREW. And I'm here, same reason as everybody else. I live in this neighborhood, and I really care about this plan and the future of this neighborhood, and particularly want to make sure that the needs of unhoused neighbors and folks who are rarely engaged during these processes are thought of. So really excited to see what's changed and appreciate the time and energy.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Theus Jones. I just happen to live at the off-Broadway apartments and heard about this plan only recently. I'm curious. I feel like I'm lucky to have found a place to live in Missoula at all. What happens here seems germane.
Thank you for joining this afternoon. Then I think we have two more folks, Bill and Jabina. If you don't mind unmuting and quickly introducing yourself, if you'd like.
Hi there, I'm Jobina McCarthy. I live on the west side. I'm a neighborhood leader with CREW, and I'm here to just make sure that the voices of the neighborhood are heard, and that this plan reflects what our neighbors need and want. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hello, I'm Bill, and I live in the River Road neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, let's move on. Since we have a smaller group, we can leave things a little more informal during this presentation. I just ask that when you're not talking, to please keep your mic on mute to avoid background noise when others are speaking. The chat is open, so feel free to use that to make notes or comments or ask questions. I think as we go through, we'll review a few slides and then open up each of the slides after I present and give a little bit of background information to the conversation, just to get your thoughts on these items as we move forward through them. To submit or to use the chat function on Zoom at the bottom of your screen, or perhaps at the top, depending on your particular setup, you'll see the little chat bubble. So if you click on that, it'll pull up a window where you can type in your comments or ask questions, and you can send them to myself or anyone else on the call. If you're on a phone, or if you want to raise your hand, that's also possible by scrolling down to the bottom of the participants list and raising your hand, and that'll let us know that you have something you'd want to say, and we'll try to keep it somewhat orderly like that. Let's see. We have about 10 people here, so not sure if we need to do we could do the live polling just so we have a record of it, but we'll try to do this pretty quickly. So if you pull out your cell phone and to log into this app, you'll send a text message to the number 22333, and you'll send the message Dover Cole 516. When you do this, it'll give you a return message saying you've joined the meeting or joined the live poll. Again, you'll send a text message to the number 22333, and you'll send the message Dover Cole 516. You just need to do this once tonight, and it'll log you into the live polling. If you have any questions, just feel free to unmute and let me know. We can try to work that out. Next, when we ask a question, to send a response, you send a message to the same number, 22333. Instead of typing Dover Cole 516 as the message, you'll just type in whatever your answer is and send that. So we'll just do these pretty quickly, so we have this and we move forward into the material. So first question is, did you participate in the virtual charrettes? Yes, you would submit A as your answer. And if you do not, then you can submit B as your answer in a text message. And again, if you have any questions on signing into this or how it works, just send me a message or feel free to just unmute yourself. The virtual charrette took place back in April. We had pretty good turnout, and that really set the framework for what was advanced in the plan. And over the last several months, from the time when the first draft was released, we've made a lot of revisions and incorporated different really important concepts from members of the public and different agencies in the city. The next question, did you participate in the community draft presentation on October 7th? A for yes, and B for no. So during that meeting, we presented a detailed overview of everything included in the initial draft plan. The recording of that is on the website, along with the draft plan itself. Tonight we'll focus on a little more specifically the things that have changed since then, but feel free to reference that previous presentation if you want to get a little more information on what we talked about then. We do have some people that did not participate at that last meeting. And just one more question. I think we already kind of got a lot of this answered already, but what is your primary interest in the plan? A for I live in the north side, west side neighborhood. B for I own property or business in or near the study area. C for I'm a resident and interested in development of the community. D for I'm generally just interested in Missoula and its future, and E for other. Sorry, there's actually one more question. We'll let this go for just another second. And as we figured during our introductions, most of those in attendance live in the neighborhood. So this is the last one. Have you reviewed the draft plan and the updated draft plan and provided comments on the project website, envisionwestbroadway.com? A for yes, B for not yet, plan on it, and C for I'm not interested. Right. And if you haven't done so, please do visit envisionwestbroadway.com. The draft plan that we'll be presenting tonight is available on the website to review, and this presentation will be made available tomorrow morning on the website. Right. So thank you for just providing that background information, and let's go quickly over the project timeline. So we began this project earlier this year, in February 2021. Started with analysis and then went into the virtual design charrette, which was the week of April 5th to 9th. During that time, we met with a lot of individuals, different city agencies, local groups and advocacy groups, and many others interested in the future of this part of Missoula and Missoula as a whole. During that week, we had open studios, we had stakeholder meetings and technical meetings. We started off with a kickoff meeting with a hands-on design session where we broke into small groups and people sat around virtual tables and we drew ideas and had conversations. From that, we led to the work in progress presentation, and that was the overall framework, the draft framework, based on the ideas that we heard over the week. We presented that back, asked questions on the different ideas, and from there we started drafting the plan based on those concepts developed during that week and the feedback we got. And then we had a virtual public presentation on the first draft of the plan on October 7th. There we presented the complete first draft. We presented the first draft and put it on the project website, and had several weeks or a couple of months almost of time for people to review the plan and provide their comments. But during that time, we took public input and had made revisions to the plan. And now we're presenting back in early November final draft plan, which we're looking to get some feedback on and comments on before it goes to the official adoption and approval process, at which time it'll be open to additional comments and public review. Right. So we've spoken so far to over 300, or we've heard from or spoken to over 340 individual people, whether this is at kickoff meetings or stakeholder meetings, technical meetings, open studios, on-site workshops, online surveys, or different events. This includes meetings at Clark Fork, at the west side, at the Clark Fork Market, as well as at the west side events in the neighborhood. And so as we continued with the plan, we've been updating the process section of the master plan report. So you'll remember that this included the word cloud that we've continually updated, the community image survey, and continuing to gather information that would lead to the key findings and issues of the plan. And this resulted in the key issues of affordable housing, social equity, and safety. And from this, we began developing more detailed strategies, designs, and concepts that you'll see you'll see in the plan and that you'll see presented just in a few slides. So at the work in progress presentation, we asked the question, based on what you heard tonight, do you think the draft plan is on the right track? This time in April, about 80% of those in attendance said yes or probably yes, that the plan was on the right track. In October, we presented the draft plan on October 7th, and we asked the same question. Do you still think the draft plan is on the right track? And here is quite similar. Again, 80% said yes or probably yes. And there were still some that couldn't tell yet or said no. So after this meeting, we continued to gather input and have created edits and a new version of the draft plan. Over this time, MRA and crew have worked together to create and distribute a neighborhood survey, which has gotten a significant amount of input in the community. We've received over 60 of these back. And it was quite interesting. A lot of really good information, and these questions really helped hone in on some detailed plan concepts and ideas, and to help shape not just the plan itself, but how public engagement would continue throughout the rest of the process and on future planning processes. So even though nearly 88% of the respondents had not participated yet in any of the meetings over the past year, it was also interesting to see that more than 89% of the respondents did support the type of mixed-use development shown in the plan. And we continue to get surveys back and look forward to seeing what other information we can learn from those living and working in the area. So we've taken all the information, all the comments, and all the public input and created this final draft of the community master plan. For those that might not be too familiar with the boundary and what the focus area is, it's this about 15 acres between West Broadway Street and the Clark Fork River, and north and south, and then North Russell Street on the west and North California Street on the east. The site, as you know, is less than a mile from downtown, has direct connections to major shared use paths, is near the intersection of two major Missoula streets, West Broadway and North Russell Street. It's also served by Mountain Line Transit. There's opportunities here to engage the river and better front the river, and also opportunities for infill development. And there's several things that help lead to this planning process. Initially, this began in the downtown master plan several years ago. I identified this area for infill development and new investments in affordable housing. But over the years since that plan update, several key items have changed. There's now new public ownership of several key parcels, which plays a key role in what the potential for this area could be, especially in terms of implementing a plan and a vision that was done in detail over these last several months. And the area is also within an urban renewal district and opportunity zones, which can help to guide investment. The plan is structured around 5 big ideas. These remain the same since the work in progress and likely remain the same throughout the plan's implementation. The details can change as things evolve, but these are the overall concepts developed throughout the course of this planning process. First one is to build the next great Missoula neighborhood center. The next is to be a good neighbor and respect local businesses currently on site. The third big idea is to connect to the river and complete the path system. The fourth is to help solve housing and commercial space affordability issues. And the fifth is to create a unique entry experience into urban Missoula. So what has changed? We'll now go over some slides showing how the plan has evolved since we last met. Public engagement section is continually being updated. We've created new pages and new layouts that more clearly illustrate some of the feedback that we've been getting, the ways we've been gathering feedback, and providing updates on the latest meetings that we had. So in the next draft, there'll probably be new section, new words, new descriptions, and inclusion of the feedback that we get from tonight added into the report. We provide some details on the Envision West Broadway website, which has had over nearly 6,900 views from 2,500 unique visitors. On the website, there's also 5 films with over 750 views. Again, these numbers will be updated as we put new videos and on the website. So for the first big idea, not too much has changed. So we'll dive into big idea number 2. Be a good neighbor and respect the local businesses currently on site. A big part of this section is to include and promote local serving uses desired by the community. In the initial draft, we included several based on the feedback that we've been getting so far. You can see in the bottom left of the screen. And based on the feedback that we got from the crew and MRA survey, we've updated this list to include the things that were most often mentioned. This list includes local restaurants and cafes, daycare, laundromat, various types of community spaces, a corner store, a grocer, someplace to get food, art studios, and incubator space. Again, at this point, after I present each slide, I'll take a moment, and if anyone would like to present a comment or ask a question relevant to that slide, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask. Again, at the end, we'll also open it up to questions and comments if you want to wait until then as well. Right. Next section that we've updated quite a bit based on a lot of really good feedback is the affordable housing strategies for the West Broadway area. So this section has expanded quite a bit to provide more strategies and more policies and more ways to focus in on providing affordable housing. So these strategies are split into these different categories. The first is zoning and planning. Within each of these, there's a short description of why these topics are important, followed by strategies to apply. Here, the first one's to reduce parking for affordable housing, to eliminate or reduce the minimum parking requirement to help lower costs. The second is to reduce the minimum unit size, to allow for micro units or small apartments of 250 to 350 square feet to provide lower cost options. Many times, plans will propose density bonuses or height bonuses to encourage additional affordable housing. However, in this particular area, the zoning already allows quite a bit of density and quite a bit of height. And so there's less possibility to expand upon this as an additional incentive. And so we have to explore additional possibilities for encouraging affordable housing, and incentivizing it. The next is project approvals. So delay and uncertainty in project approvals and the process can really increase development costs, which ultimately gets passed down to those who live in or near or in the new dwelling units. So reducing approval times and having clear, objective, and consistent rules for automatic or at least significantly streamlined approvals is a really simple and effective way of reducing housing costs. This idea came from some of the comments that we received from the public. And streamlining development approvals and entitlement processes for projects that include affordable housing in a commercial space can be a way to incentivize those projects and bring down costs. Ultimately, those cost savings would then be passed on to the affordable units or affordable spaces. And this would require establishing clear criteria for the necessary number of units and other standards that must be met in order to go through the streamlined process. The next are impact fees. So these are a challenging issue with state laws. In many ways, impact fees are fees that are assessed on new development to fund improvements such as parks and schools and transportation, basically under the assumption that new residents will increase the burden on existing facilities. However, these fees are then typically allocated to those that are moving into the new housing or commercial space. So it's just passed on. So even though those people that are moving in will still pay property taxes and other taxes, because they're moving into a new unit, they're then required to pay additional fees that someone moving into an existing unit wouldn't be required to pay. So this plan recommends exploring options to minimize impact fees. This would have to be something done across the board or in coordination with tax increment financing funds or refunds from outside sources. State law dictates what can and can't be done. It's required to have a uniform fee. You can't really distinguish between affordable and non-affordable, but there could be other ways of reimbursing those fees for units that are affordable. And by requiring them to be affordable and reducing the fee, that will help offset the cost for those building the units. And that was another idea that came out of the public. Next is financing and funding. So the West Broadway area is located within Missoula Redevelopment Agency's Urban Renewal District, or their URD2. So this makes several things available, and most importantly, it makes tax increment financing funds available. And these funds can be reinvested into projects that improve the quality of life for the neighborhood and the community. And so they must be put towards a public purpose. It can be planning and analysis, land acquisition, removal of structures, infrastructure, or general redevelopment activities, including affordable housing. So the first strategy here is to use low-income housing tax credits. These are federal tax credits for the development of affordable housing. The second is to utilize TIF funds to construct public infrastructure and open space. This can help to subsidize the construction of lawn greens or the new park or other sort of new street or street redesigns within the study area. TIF funds can also be used to incentivize affordable housing on privately held parcels. As we'll see coming up, the city does own some land within this area, including the Missoula water site and the Sleepy Inn. But a lot of the area is owned by private individuals, private developers, existing businesses. And so what happens on their site is ultimately up to them as individuals, as long as it fits within the existing zoning. And so some of these strategies, project approvals, and the use of TIF funds to help incentivize affordable housing can help promote the development of affordable housing on these private properties and these private parcels. So if and when those owners decide to do something with their property, in addition to what they're doing today, these funds can help incentivize them to build affordable housing. The state is somewhat restrictive in terms of other strategies that other places use, such as mandatory inclusionary housing. And so we have to look at strategies here that will fit within the confines of what we're allowed to do. And the last is to use City of Missoula Affordable Housing Trust Funds to help make grants or loans to help fund and incentivize the construction of affordable housing units, private developments, and to help support affordable housing on the city-owned parcels. And the last strategy here is new market tax credits to help, which encourage investment in lower income communities or areas that haven't experienced development or investment and have vacant commercial properties. So these are all different strategies to use towards implementing and incentivizing affordable housing. I'll just go through the next slide and then we can open up this to conversation. Right, so the city owns several parcels within the study area, and leveraging the city-owned land is really quite important, and one of the main reasons why this planning process was brought up and advanced when it was. So city-owned area, city-owned land in this area includes the Sleepy Inn site, Missoula water site, and a couple of adjacent parcels, and a portion of the Flynn Lowney ditch. So one of the largest costs of development, and thus the ultimate cost of the units or the rent, is the cost of the land on which to build. And this is in addition to costs of labor and materials and lending expenses and the expenses incurred during the design and permitting process. So removing the cost of acquiring land from the development equation can significantly reduce the cost of construction per unit. With city-owned land, the city can provide the land to a developer, a private or public developer, or community land trust at a low cost or a low rent in a lease, if that was the option pursued, in exchange for the provision of permanently affordable housing and perhaps other benefits. And so in a sense, by providing the land at a reduced cost, that would then allow the developer to build the affordable units that would be required in return for the lower cost of the land. One of the things that has changed over the course of the last year has been the status of the Flynn Lowney ditch. So the city has acquired the water easement rights to the ditch, which opens up several possibilities for its future use. But what happens with that is really dependent on who owns the underlying land. So while the city has control of the water rights, others in many areas actually own the land underneath the ditch. And so the plan explores three different options depending on the particular situation. So where the city owns the land underneath the ditch, it can be transformed into usable park space. Where the ditch crosses through private property within the study area, it's possible to utilize the incentive of removing the easement and allowing for development across the ditch as an additional incentive for affordable housing. And the other option that the plan looks at is continuing to utilize the ditch for more of a stormwater management function. So building upon city-owned land and what's possible with that, there's several different partnership strategies that can be explored. And this is how things on the publicly owned side would actually get built. So the city, or specifically the MRA and the business improvement district, don't build things. So they would work in partnership with someone who does. So a developer or a community land trust or something similar to that, who would establish an agreement between the entities to construct the actual physical housing and project, or it could be the city to build roads and parks. So the first is to consider developing city-owned parcels through a public-private partnership or joint development. This can be done through a ground lease or selling the land at a reduced rate through an agreement with that entity to provide a certain number of affordable housing units. Second option to explore is partnering with a nonprofit developer or a community land trust to help build permanently affordable housing or commercial and permanently affordable commercial makerspace on city-owned parcels. In many ways, a community land trust can provide opportunities for affordable home ownership, much like is the case today with Clark Fork Commons. The third option is to pursue coordination with Missoula Housing Authority to develop public housing on publicly owned land within the area. And so these are different options to work through as the city advances in the planning process. So this is still a higher level plan at the master planning level, and it will then go into more detailed plans when it gets time to develop or decide what happens on a specific parcel. And so these are all the negotiations and details that will have to come out of that future process. But this plan, the intent is to give that shape and help guide what happens there, and to give support to the city and to the different agencies to get from the private sector or the nonprofit developer or the community land trust or the agencies, state agencies or others, what is desired from the community. Just a couple more. The next is tenant support and assistance. Building more housing, whether it's market rate and affordable, is generally a good thing when there's a housing shortage, especially building affordable housing, but it's not quite enough. So this plan outlines several strategies for further expanding affordability and tenant protections, including expanding the housing choice voucher program for all units developed within partnership with the city, to protect existing residential tenants. So if there's any residential renters or tenants that are displaced due to redevelopment in partnership with the city, they should be offered displacement compensation and right of return. And short-term rentals, such as Airbnb, should be limited in the affordable housing units. It can be a valuable way to subsidize housing costs, but at the same time, you don't want it to become something that's rented out almost full-time and wouldn't then really be benefiting and providing housing for those in Missoula that need it. But perhaps coming up with some balance where it can provide a supplemental income, but it wouldn't be the primary use of that unit. And last, we have the recommended affordable housing income target. So this has been modified from last time. And so income targets are based on, it's called area median income, which is AMI, which is the annual income earned by a typical household in the Missoula area. And so the updated plan recommends 35% of the affordable units targeted for those earning up to 30% of AMI, 35% of the units targeted to those earning between 30 and 80% of area median income, and 30% of the units, affordable housing units, targeted to those earning between 80% and 120% of AMI. Right, that was a lot, and some jargon was in there. So happy to open it up now to questions or comments before we move on to some of the next areas that have been updated.
I have a few questions. I don't know how to raise my hand.
Sure.
Cool. So my first question was in this limit short-term rentals here on page 65 that you have up. Is that talking about, it's kind of, this text is kind of incredibly difficult to read. Is this for all units that are on city-held land? Does this include kind of requiring that if folks get access to tax increment financing dollars, would that also be used to like as a condition of getting those dollars, limiting short-term rentals?
Those are good questions. At the moment, how it's worded is that any of the subsidized housing, any of the units that are developed in partnership with the city for affordable housing should be limited. This might be a bigger policy issue, but it's one worth considering.
So this is suggesting that only affordable units are limited in their ability to short-term rental and not market rate.
It could be, or it could be on the city-owned land. What happens on the privately developed land is a little there's less control over what can be asked for.
Gotcha. I guess some more clarity in language would be helpful there in my mind. And also, I wonder about putting some information in here. There was on maybe the first or second slide that you showed about conditioning TIF funds to require that you include affordable housing. I just wanted to note it said affordable and not permanently affordable. So if that's an option, I think that's pretty important. And also that if this is a way that we could additionally condition those dollars, I think that would be really meaningful given what neighbors are seeing happen in this housing market. Yeah, short-term rentals are a big problem.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Sam. All right, anyone else?
Rob, I noticed that Theus asked a question about what the current AMI is.
That page in my PDF. Yes, that's a good question. Right. So median income for the city of Missoula, according to census data, the 5-year census data is 47,426. Typically, every year, HUD, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency, recalculates this and will develop different standards of what that area median income is depending on household size. So we can send out a link to help explain what that might be depending on size of the household. And
so Rob, based on 2019 numbers, it's $57,347.
That's the HUD number.
Well, that's Census ACS.
Okay.
Yeah, of 2019.
Okay.
So it's in the $50,000 range.
Thank you, Ellen.
Sure.
So what that
reference you look at.
And so what that typically means then is, depending on the household size, that number might be higher or lower, and then you'll target the rents, the ownership cost to what's considered affordable for that income bracket. It's a great question. So thank you, Theus. All right. So this is the illustrative plan from Okay, I can see Matthew has his hand raised.
Hey, Rob, on that recommended affordable housing income targets, so is that saying then that it's on properties that are, so city-owned properties that are developed, that a household income of $0 to $60,000 is what is allowable to purchase one of those units? The cap on that would be $60,000 for a household income.
Similar to that, and it would be, if it was to be purchased, it would be purchased in a manner like Clark Commons, or rented at an established rate. The actual number will depend on the number of the size of the apartment and the number of members of the household. And so it could be lower, like 30%, 57,000. That's very possible for a single person household. If it's a larger household, that number will go higher and above the area median income, up to 120%. And so this wouldn't be for all of the units developed, but for those designated as affordable. And this would be spread across the entire site, a combination of using incentives for development that occurs on private property, especially to achieve additional numbers of the middle income, 80% to 120% AMI housing, and that affordable housing that's part of development on city-owned. So it'll be a combination of market rate and affordable units.
Okay. And then I'm curious, like on number 1 there, where it says expand the housing choice voucher program. I guess I'm confused, like that last sentence, this strategy should also be applied citywide. I'm kind of confused on some of the components in here that seem like they're just policy issues that seem kind of pointless to put in this plan that's for this block. Like, can you explain that?
So addressing affordable housing across the entire city is a large, difficult process, and something that this plan is really just one tiny piece of. So while it's focusing in on these several blocks, it is important to think about the bigger picture and how housing in this area will have an impact on the rest of the city. And so looking at ways that different strategies that could be applied here perhaps could be applied in other places across the city to help meet housing needs and to help protect people that have been living in Missoula for a long time, and such that they can maintain and keep on living in that area. And so this is a planning document, and as such, it's not regulatory. So it's to provide background and support for changes to regulations to would support content of this plan. But just because it's included in this plan does not make it a new citywide regulation or even a regulation yet for this specific site. If that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Affordable housing is a tough issue, and it's not just Missoula. It's almost everywhere almost everywhere these issues are arising, and more strategies are needed to just expand the ultimate number of housing and the number of affordable units, and to protect existing residents. All right. So on this slide now, this is the illustrative plan. An illustrative plan is a document that depicts the potential future build out of an area. And then it's looking long-term, 10 or 20 years down the road. And this isn't design drawings or construction drawings. It's just an illustrative example of types of buildings, where they should be located, and the general urban form and pattern that should be applied to this area. What actually happens will depend on the actions of many agencies, individuals who own land, the area, but this will give support and guidance to those both from the city side and from the private side as they make those decisions. So in this example, this is from September. The dark gray is existing buildings. The reddish pink are the proposed buildings. The light gray is surface parking or other sorts of parking. Green is open space, trails and plazas. So since our previous time we met, there's been some changes and some significant changes to the plan. Perhaps most important is what happens on West Broadway Street. We've been coordinating with the city and as well as the Montana Department of Transportation to come up with a strategy for West Broadway Street that meets city needs, resident needs, and the expectations of the Montana Department of Transportation who own and control this road. So you can see, we'll go into some more detail on some later slides that explore potential possibilities for West Broadway Street to calm the street and make it safer to cross, including a roundabout, California Street and Tool, while also accommodating the traffic needs of MDT in their work with the Russell Street and Russell Street Bridge. Also, you'll notice in some of these circled squared areas on the bottom right, downtown Lions Park has a new plan and will be seeing some renovations. And in this park, it'll include a lot of the things that people mentioned for what they wanted to see in the study area, including community gardens and a playground. And so that might change the thoughts on what exactly should happen on the green space and open space within the study area, so it's not duplicative of what's happening a block away, but supportive of it. And also, there's now the opportunity to rethink the Flynn Lowney ditch. So you can see here, this middle on the lower portion of the screen, middle block. In this area, generally speaking, the ditch and the land underneath it is owned by the city, and so it may be possible to transform that area into a more usable park and open space, including additional community gardens by Clark Fork Commons. And on the left side of this illustrative plan, one can imagine that if the ditch was to go away in coordination with private property owners, perhaps there could be a way to incorporate that land into a larger development if it included affordable housing. So I see in the comments, can developers refuse to provide affordable units entirely? On private property, that is the case. So that's why in this plan, we're outlining several different incentives and different ways to encourage affordable units to be incorporated into, or permanently affordable units incorporated into private development, which means TIF funding can be used and as an incentive, or parking reductions, or others towards other funding from the city, as well as the the streamlined approval process and those other ideas, are all things to use to help encourage the inclusion of affordable housing within the private development without mandating it, which is not permitted. That's a really good question. So for parks and public space, again, the updates here is basically recognizing that the Downtown Lions Park plan includes the playground and park. So perhaps within the West Broadway planning area, a small secondary playground or natural structures that kids can climb on can be located within the long green or any new park space instead of a full-size playground, since one will exist just on the other side of the street. And to explore a better way, or explore new ways of using the Flynn Lowney ditch. And we also want to clarify that the plan seeks to increase waterfront views while not exactly increasing access to the river in this particular area because of the ditch or the levee alongside the site. But also I wanted to note that the plan for downtown Lions Park does include water access. Right. Before we go on to the next section talking about West Broadway Street, I think that would be a good time to open it up to any questions, comments on what we've discussed.
Yeah, this is KB. My concern with that water access would just be, you know, blocking off the river essentially with this whole block. I know it's supposed to be a gateway. It's supposed to be a place for like the whole community. And I just kind of feel like with like the West Broadway Island, I mean, not just me, but it is a major access point to the Clark Fork River. So I'm just kind of wondering like what the access, parking, and then I feel like the river itself is what is actually going to be the draw to this neighborhood. You know, the California Street area is like a major access to the river and kind of the downtown river corridor. So as the use in the river increases, I feel like, you know, that activity is going to, and use is going to kind of shape this area a little bit. And I'm just kind of concerned about like parking, ease of use for the whole community to use. So I understand, you know, building the units without the parking to, you know, try to encourage people to ride the bus, walk, all that. But if this is supposed to be a place for the whole community, there has to be parking. And I don't know the kind of Lions Park area, but just being someone that lives in this area, I don't really see in the plan where there's parking going to accommodate the type of use that we're going to see in this area. So that would just be something I would be concerned about in this. And then, you know, making it a place that encourage, I mean, the river is the center of the city, right? So like, this needs to be a place that encourages people to, you know, it makes it easy for people to go to. It's a place they want to go, and not just for the people that live here on this block, but a place, you know, for the whole community. Just it's easy for them to come and use, and it, you know, that is the river is the gateway, essentially. So I feel like I feel like the river itself is kind of missing out of this project a little bit. And, you know, again, that's more, you know, California Street East, but at the same time, this block, you know, from California Street to Russell, as far as park, it's got to kind of have some forward thinking to it of, you know, what that river use is going to do and what the accesses are and things like that, if that makes sense. Kind of rambling there.
No, that does make sense. Parking, we'll touch on that in a little bit, is a big issue here, and you know, it's a balancing act. Parking takes space that could otherwise be put towards housing, and when you have to structure it, it becomes quite expensive.
Right, but also it has to be a block to sustain, right? So like if you just put a bunch of low income, like nobody's gonna like in a few years it'll just die after it's brand. Like it has to have like the river gives it a purpose. It's the gateway. It's the place to go park. It's the place the West Broadway Island is like the place to get out of the river if you're a tuber. And then that just enhances the economy mixed with a balance of affordable housing. And you put all that together and it just creates a thriving environment, right? Where if you just make a bunch of no nonsense, you know, a building, like create a building that's like, supposed to be like the iconic building of Missoula per se, like nobody's going to come to that block for that building. If people are going to come to that block to get in and out of the river is what they're going to come there to do. So you look at like some other communities that have kind of put the river first, right? Like they clean up their river, and then that use in the river dictates has a major play in kind of, you know, the housing and the businesses and that type of thing that gets developed in that area. And it gives it a purpose rather than just kind of putting it in here and like throwing it to the wind. And it gives it a way to sustain.
Yeah,
over time.
That's very true. The downtown master plan that this is essentially an outgrowth and actually part of does make a big reference to engaging and connecting to the river. We can pull up the plan later, but it includes recommendations so that buildings will front the river. So fronts of buildings will face towards the river and face towards the trail, and also having a new connection from the area to the north down through the site through this long green. We have some illustrations of what that could look like, and we can pull those up after this presentation, and continuing all the way down to really enforce that connection between West Broadway Street, existing neighborhoods, and what could be a new commercial or mixed-use center in this area, as well as making sure the trail has lighting and shade trees, and that most importantly, or very important, that the trail is connected. There's the gap further down, so making sure that connection to downtown is completed. But those are all really good points.
Is it indicated here on this hypothetical map what's public and what's private in this green zone? Like, good developers assert that a good chunk of this area is for the tenants and that it would be trespassing to use too much of it?
Ideally, the green spaces here are recommended to be public spaces to be used by the public. That would be this area and this area and this one. Although this one is, this is just a suggestion. This is on private property, so and even what's happening down here. And so the plan's envisioned so that when new green spaces are connected, that they're truly public spaces.
So no trespassing signs.
That's the intent. Again, if it's just private development on private land, there's limits to what can be done with that. But that's why the incentives of TIF and other funding can help to encourage publicly accessible and actually public use space. I see Annette has her hand.
Thanks, Rob. I just wanted to respond to KB's comments about river access. And he's correct that the river is a really important draw to this neighborhood. There is a trail that does run along the river, and that the intent, of course, is to enhance that and make that an integral part of this project. The overarching, I think some of your comments, KB, were maybe just putting buildings out here and sort of letting them just sort of, I forget your exact comments, but just sort of let them kind of do their own thing. The intent of this plan really is to create a multi-use neighborhood that has residential, a mixed residential, so a mixed demographic and mixed income of residential, but also commercial activities, places of employment, places for cafes, or maybe you could do some shopping. Perhaps there's a small theater or an art studio. Even I think that the plan calls for some sort of maker spaces, entrepreneurial spaces. So the intent is that this is not a space for just one group of people, but that it's a mixed use. And right along the south edge of this site, the levee, the access into the river, it's a really steep bank and difficult to get direct access into the water right from south of this site. But downtown Lions Park, which is right on the edge, the southeast edge of our site, there's a plan to enhance access to the water from there. And so these are kind of symbiotic relationships that work back and forth with each other. So I don't think that we're necessarily cutting off our nose to spite our face by not having direct access into the water right along the site that we're looking at, because there is access in adjacent areas.
Correct. And I see how that could work, but where are people going to park? I mean, how are people going to use it? How's it going to like entice people from the entire community to come to this block to use that? Because what's happening is it's just gonna, if there's no parking and it's just cut off, the river essentially is going to be cut off by giant buildings. Like nobody's going to come there. Like no one's going to come there. So you have to create a place that makes it easy for people to come there to do business, people that live there to like get in and out of their house. And that balance will create the things that we want to achieve here in Missoula, like the housing. You know, this block can't solve the entire housing issue for Missoula. It can contribute to it, but I think we have to like look at this block as like for the whole community as well, and like the gateway to Missoula, like you're saying. And if we just close it off, it's not going to be that. It's just going to be something people drive by, and it's, you know, if it's not easy to get into, they're not going to use it. But what is going to be used in this river for the rest of the history of time is the river itself. So I see this block as like riverfront property, and this is an opportunity. We have to like do the right thing with this property in our city. We have to be forward thinking about what the future looks like and all kinds of things. But access to the river is a huge thing in Missoula. We don't have many places to access our river here in Missoula. California Street, Lions Park, that's like one of the most major access points. And then again, the West Broadway Island. If we want that place to thrive, it has to have parking, it has to have access.
And it has to be something more than landscaping for development.
Correct.
These are really great comments, and I encourage you to take a look at the plan document to see what it talks about, as well as the Parks Department has a specific plan that they've been working on that's looking at river access throughout the entire city and identifying areas where it's possible and ideal to enhance, create new access to the river. Those are good points. And so parking is included on street as well as within these mid-block areas, and it leaves open the opportunity for, depending on the amount of development that ultimately comes in, leaves open the opportunity for structured parking as well. It needs to be more, balancing the cost of parking with housing affordability, as well as improving access to the site from transit purposes and walking and biking. So these next slides will take a look at, and also, so right now it's an area that is cut off from much of the rest of the city by West Broadway Street, which function as a barrier between the neighborhood and the river. And so this plan looks at ways to transform West Broadway Street, or to increase the connectivity across it. So people that live, work in the north side, west side neighborhoods can access this area, have a safer connection to get down to the river without having to drive. Not to say that people shouldn't drive there, but making sure that people have the choice and the options available to safely get there by means that they need to. So in the top image here, it says existing is existing conditions today. At this time, the Montana Department of Transportation, or MDT, state agency, is reconstructing the Russell Street Bridge and the intersection of Russell Street with West Broadway Street. MDT is also planning a redesign of West Broadway Street, including from Russell to California Street. And agreements between the city and the state will maintain 4 lanes of traffic here and 2 left turn lanes from West Broadway onto Russell Street. So these are the conditions that we're working with. And ultimately, this is a state road. They own it and have the ultimate authority to design it as they need. And so through this plan, coordinating with the city and others, and working with MDT, we're looking to reimagine this change and to influence the design, the ultimate design that could get built. And the key things that this plan proposes that's not included in initial schematic designs from MDT is the roundabout at North California Street, which would provide new and more efficient access from North California Street back onto West Broadway, tool, or putting in a mid-block crossing with some sort of traffic control signal near Burn Street. And these are things that aren't included in the existing or current plans, but would help to significantly improve access to the neighborhood. On the next, this design is also possible to transform further in the future to something that might be more of an urban downtown street as opposed to a high traffic arterial. So perhaps 15 or 20 years, conditions change, it might be time to reconsider the street. And so the proposed design will allow the outer lane in each direction to transform. And I'll talk about that on this page when we take a closer look. So this was the design, the original design that we were working with back in September, but it's been transformed to better reflect MDT's needs and to help shape their new construction. And so you can see here at number 1, the plan proposes a new pedestrian crossing with a hawk or high intensity activated crosswalk beacon or some sort of signal where pedestrians push the button and it will come in and essentially tell the cars to stop. And then pedestrians or cyclists or whoever might be crossing here have 2 lanes to cross at a time with a large median and pedestrian refuge in place to wait in between if needed. It also proposes appropriate lighting to ensure visibility at night at these crossings. And the roundabout is also a critical feature for maintaining efficient traffic flow and also improving pedestrian connections. Instead of having to cross 4 or 5 lanes of traffic at once, one would only have to cross 1 or 2 lanes and then have an ability to stop and not wait in the middle of traffic, but have a resting place. The plan also recommends building the bike lanes up at the level of the sidewalk as essentially cycle tracks to provide some separation between cyclists and motorists, as well as street trees planted along the sidewalk in between the bike lane and the sidewalk. In the future, this outer lanes in each direction can be transformed into on-street parking, additional locations for trees to be planted, and a buffer for sidewalks. Again, that would be a long-term goal, 20 years down. Plan also recommends building and putting in more significant mountain line bus stops. So not just a bench with a sign, but a covered shelter, a place where it's convenient and dignified to wait for the bus. And to require new buildings to be meet build-to lines. So set back from the right-of-way line several feet to get wider sidewalks. So these changes are things to help improve access to the site, both for those driving, those taking transit, and those walking and those biking. And this is in addition to the trail, Ron's River Trail on the south side of the site. All right, again, open it up for conversation.
There's a staggering amount of folks who are just crossing from the path across Broadway right there. well, pretty much all the time. It's a bad street to go cruising down at any given speed because it really can be almost as surprising as the deer. Is there any talk of a pedestrian overcrossing?
There has not been. In many ways, those are quite expensive to build, and at that point, you're essentially giving up the design of the street, saying it'll remain a place just for cars, and that people need to be taken off of it. So the recommendation to advance with the city and MDT is to create a street that's more humane and more tame, and still manage traffic volumes, but at lower speeds and with better sidewalks and crossings.
So Rob, I noticed that Sam has their hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of second Theus's concern about crossing on Broadway. It's really good to hear that, one of the thoughts going into this new design is that we need to make the street a safer place to cross. But yeah, as is, you're taking your life in your hands. And given that it's going to, at least for the next couple decades, remain a state highway, I guess I share the concern about pedestrian crossings here that are surface level. Just wanted to put that out there. I also wondered, in this plan, there's a distinction drawn between roundabouts and traffic circles. And I guess I'm wondering, has MDT kind of bought into this, this traffic circle as opposed to a traffic roundabout or whatever, the slower one, smaller one is that something that's actually possible on a state highway?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So, the important thing to, when we're talking about, first of all, crossing the street. So there are instances where, pedestrian bridges could be a great idea, but the bigger issue is people very, very rarely use them. It's more likely that people are just going to cross where they want to cross and not have to walk out of the way and go up a flight of stairs and then go over and then go back down a flight of stairs. So typically the position we recommend is to design the street in such a way that it's safer for everyone while still putting in better places to cross. So it's not just a matter of funding, but it's also a matter of people generally just won't use it. People will cross where they want to cross. And so, even in putting in a more safer crossing here, it's still likely that people might not use it and cross elsewhere. And so by designing the street in a way that is safer and slower and encourages lower speeds, it becomes safer for everyone and kind of helps to avoid that issue of people just crossing at grade because they don't want to have to go up a flight of stairs and then go back over and back down.
I'm just going to jump in real quick, Rob, there, just because in this area, there are no alternatives. I just kind of want to name that. The only way to cross in this area at this point in time, or that I have ever conceived of crossing, is at the current light where this traffic circle would eventually be. And it takes an eternity to cross the street. So I just wanted to say there's not really alternatives around here. So people are absolutely going to use this crosswalk if it feels safe. Yeah, there's not a plethora of ways to cross this very dangerous road. There's, I think, about none at this point in time. So, yeah.
That's a very good point. So these are the two new options to safely cross.
Cool.
Long-term speed limit changes?
The plan doesn't get into the details of that. It would have to ideally be slower, but this ties back to the roundabout question. And so these plans are being reviewed now and brought to MDT to get their thoughts at it. But the biggest thing and most important thing that the plan can do in terms of what happens on West Broadway Street is advocating for a better design, and MDT may do otherwise, one that still meets their needs. So by having design in this plan that promotes and advocates for the things that are desired and needed to make it a safer street, the more likely it is for MDT to make those improvements. And so we kept the design in the realm of what's pretty possible by MDT, but at this point it hasn't been agreed upon. This is pushing for a specific design or pieces of a design to improve upon what has been done, but the city is in conversations with MDT and working through that. And so the more support from the community, the more support from different planning documents that includes community goals such as safer crossings and better crossings and slower speeds, the better. This plan can only go so far, especially on the issue of West Broadway Street. It was a city street. We have a lot more opportunity to really rethink it.
I think the tunnel on Russell Street would be a good example of something that could be done. That wouldn't be too difficult.
Those are other suggestions similar to the overpass.
Yeah, similar, but this is something that's more familiar to our city, I guess.
So Rob, I just, this is Annette. I want to just jump in for a second about the, Sam, your comments about the traffic circle or roundabout, and is MDT on board? And just want to sort of echo what Rob said, that MDT has not committed to this. However, the city is very much in favor of some sort of strategy like this. Those of you who may have been involved in the initial charrette back in April might recall that the formal boundary for the study area that we're looking at did not include West Broadway. It was drawn right at the curb line, and we were just looking south to the river. But we heard, there were about three topics that we heard again and again and again and again from public comment. One of them was crossing West Broadway. How do we get across West Broadway? And one was about affordable housing. And we heard so loud and clear that unless getting across West Broadway is safe and accessible and convenient, people aren't really going to want to come to this site. And it makes this site less chance of being successful. And so we stepped back a little bit and included recommendations for what to do on West Broadway. And this roundabout, Sam, I can't say yet if it's a roundabout or if it's a traffic circle, because it hasn't really been engineered. But that concept, we deliberately chose to include that in this master plan in response to comments that we heard, because it's such a big issue for the neighborhood. And I would echo what Rob says. I've seen in other communities, a lot of other communities, a lot of investment in pedestrian bridges or investment in tunnels. And really, if you can make them work, surface crossing is the best strategy from an urban designing standpoint, because what you want to do is stitch this neighborhood together, right? You don't want the street to be this big divide anymore. You want to be able to stitch it together. And it's going to take a lot of conversations back and forth with the city and with MDT with regard to how do we reduce traffic volumes? How do we mitigate traffic speed? How do we get this roundabout or this traffic circle so that it works for everybody? But I can tell you that the city's goal is to make this a street for everybody, not a street just for cars, which it really is right now today, but a street for everybody. And so there may not be immediate satisfaction, but this will be one of the highest priorities when it comes to trying to move things forward in implementation of this plan.
Thank you, Annette, for the clarification. So right now, we're not looking at another traffic signal here just because of its proximity to the Russell Street intersection and traffic signal. And perhaps pushback from MDT on that. We are proposing a signal called like a hawk or high intensity activated crosswalk beacon or a similar one. Is basically a large signal that will go to orange and red when someone pushes the button to stop traffic there. And you know, the block layout that we sketched out is essentially one to accommodate buildings that are of a size for, you know, standard size to fit double loaded corridors, basically a more efficient design and building design to make them lower cost to build, and more efficient use of materials, parking in the middle. But yes, traffic signals could be a good way of managing traffic and slowing them down. Again, that would have to be a longer term thing. Working with MDT at this time to take incremental steps, you know, that might not be an ideal perspective from a specific site or urban design, but recognizing that, you know, MDT has larger state goals that they're looking to advance. Those are great comments, and we'll make note of it. A few more slides. So the plan also talks about phasing. So not everything will happen at once. What could happen will vary greatly depending on a whole host of items. Some of them that the city has control over, and others are not so much. So over here, you can see in this orange line, this represents land that's currently owned by or controlled by the city. Again, Missoula Water and a couple adjacent buildings. And really, these are the areas where change can happen first, and really where the city has the most control over what that change is. So it's not just, in this area, it's not just incentives to hope that things get done as envisioned by the plan, but there could be greater control over requiring things to happen as envisioned by the plan. So what I'll do is now run through a few slides that show what the phasing could be. So essentially starting with, you know, what's publicly owned. The first phase envisioned in the first few years would be improvements to West Broadway Street, improving the safety of the crossings and biking, traffic flow, as well as redeveloping what's currently the Sleepy Inn site. And this would happen on city-owned land and for the Sleepy Inn site, and then working in coordination with MDT for their improvements and their ultimate design on West Broadway Street. The next phase then would likely be what happens on the Missoula Water site. And here, the main goal is really to, in this one area, create a new center, a new public square of a sense for this area of Missoula, and starting to begin to build this new connection from West Broadway Street down towards the river, connection with green space, connection with shared street space, and connections with new buildings lined with active uses, whether it's commercial use or office use or profit space or some sort of community space. And so within this one design, this one move on Missoula Water site, you already can create quite a bit of gravity, or really try to create a place right now that really has no center within, you know, these blocks bounded by Russell Street, West Broadway, and California, and you know, start to really bring the connection through from West Broadway and the neighborhood to the north down into the site, instead of being walled off by just one big row of buildings across a long block that you cannot get through. Moving forward, can imagine that that connection is completed from West Broadway Street down towards the river. Some of this area is privately owned, and so it would require coordination with the private landowners, as well as private landowners developing their own projects here. So some of the green space would be, the green space shown here would be public, both on public land, and ideally the connection down towards the river would continue that trend. And in the longer term, through various incentives and changing needs, it's possible to imagine other sites throughout the area, privately held land, also redeveloping and filling in and completing this essentially neighborhood center. And what happens in the timing and the phasing for those developments is really, it's really hard to pin down. It will depend on when the incentives can become available, and then mostly upon individual property owners and what they decide to do and as best for their land and their property. And so while this plan provides guidance and recommendations and will establish a series of incentives, it's still in the planning level and not regulatory, and it doesn't require things to happen on those private developments as shown here. In the last couple, go through a couple more slides and then we can open it back up. So the proposed development program. So basically this is pulling it all together. And because the site's a mix of publicly owned land, which there's a little more control over what happens, as well as a mix of privately owned land where incentives are what's utilized to implement the plan or move it in that direction. We're looking at these numbers here, which are slightly different in terms of the square footage of leasable space for retail and restaurants and for office space from the last iteration of the plan. The number of market rate and affordable units targeted for these various income brackets remain the same, although the income brackets have been adjusted as we talked about before. In many ways, this is this proposed development program is what's anticipated through phase 3. So what happens in these within this development area, as these other areas develop, the amount of affordable housing or the amount of rather market rate housing and hopefully incentivized affordable housing will increase as well. And the plan includes parking spaces using surface parking lots, located in mid-block locations, as well as on-street parking on all the streets within the area. But the plan recognizes that additional parking is likely to be needed, and there's, depending on how much non-residential use is added to the area. And this could come in the form of underground parking or perhaps parking garages. But the downtown master plan recommends parking garages in several other locations closer into the core of what's downtown, and so it's hard to recommend that be the case. And so the plan really focuses on improving connectivity to the area and access to the area by other means, incorporating as much parking as possible, but not letting parking dictate ultimately the design of the area, but working to incorporate as much as possible. All right. Does anyone have any questions on this section? Message from John. It's a good point to make, John. So thank you for sharing that. Basically, to summarize, his message is that when you design places such that you don't anticipate there to be pedestrians or cyclists, you're less likely to anticipate them and more likely to have conflicts. So that's a thought process behind some really new street designs in some places where they essentially do shared streets where there's essentially no separation of any of the uses and everything shares the same space at roughly the same speed. It's quite an extreme example of that. where there's no signals, no stop signs, no sidewalk, bike lane, or carriageway. It's all just one space, and people move slowly enough, and you're basically expecting the unexpected, and so people operate accordingly. That's it can be appropriate in some places, but that's the other end of the extreme from a highway, and that's really something good for cores of downtowns where there's really high pedestrian volumes and quite different, but the concept remains the same. People need to be aware of where they are while driving and what to expect based on the design of the street and the visual cues that you give them from the placement of things such as street trees, pavement markings, curbs, lane widths, on-street parking. These all provide people that are driving with essentially cues, whether they recognize it or not, of having to drive slower or to expect unexpected.
I have a question. I couldn't help but notice when you had the aerial map up, and I'm sure there was, but how much thought was put into the possibility of some of this land actually being used to maybe reroute West Broadway? The kind of the outline of this is the block as it sits today, but what if some of these buildings actually are on the north side of Broadway? So how much thought was put into that actually when looking at that West Broadway, the issue there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what Broadway Street itself is unlikely to change its alignment. It would require eminent domain, the acquiring of private properties for the use of roadways.
Well, I'm just kind of seeing through this, like on this block right here, you can kind of see how it takes a turn, goes straight, and then it kind of, cuts back toward the south again right there. You could almost see how not necessarily much of it, but it could be, it could be routed through here a little bit differently, which could have a huge effect on the flow of traffic and crossing, getting across the street and all that. It's almost like, and if the city owns most of that property that's, on the front, fronting Broadway, I'm just curious. I'm not saying it's the right idea by any means. I'm just wondering. Just something I'm noticing.
That's an interesting thought, and not something that I personally thought or considered. Typically, these large right-of-ways remain fairly consistent over time. A good thing and a bad thing. It's good if you get the design right from the beginning, because then you're pretty much locked in. But it's a challenging thing if you get the design wrong in the beginning and you essentially are stuck with it for a long time, and it would require a large investment because it's not just the pavement, it's the utilities, sewers, and other lines that are running underneath the road, and so things like that can end up being fairly costly. So we tried to work within that context and that framework to figure out how do we improve it the best we can, given the constraints and the likely funding sources that are available, and focusing resources and efforts on the housing affordability issue and making it easier to cross. That's a good comment, and thank you for bringing that up.
I think everything that you're trying to achieve is awesome. My big thing with it too is the sustainability. Just trying to look at this from the river, from the traffic, from the community use. I really want to see it sustainable. I just don't want to see something get created and it becomes just a matter of time, just kind of the rundown part of Missoula.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm hoping that that's not the case. And I encourage you to take a look through some of the other aspects of the plan and different ideas to help avoid that.
You bet.
Amy, I think has her hand up. Has their hand up?
Oh, yes, thank you. Question. So I'm fairly new to these type of presentations in the timeline. I see where you're coming in the different phases. Is there any way you could give proposed timeline or maybe even the next action steps of what happens? And then secondly, does there we go. And then secondly, does Missoula Water, them moving or how does that correlate with Missoula Water moving to the Scott Street area?
Right. So your first question, there is an implementation chapter, an implementation matrix that outlines steps that should be taken or recommended to be taken, the different strategies and policies and the timeframes for them. It provides some background information on how the plan will be implemented, the role of community development agencies, and development of public property versus changes on private property, and how those things are coordinated, and really what can be expected out of both of those processes. And then, as well as this implementation matrix, which has some specific strategies and activities with a recommended lead agency and anticipated time frame. Missoula Water is anticipated to be moving to the Scott Street area, and so any changes on the Missoula Water site here, the existing site, would be dependent on that move and their time frame for that as that project advances. Ellen?
Rob, did you call on me?
Yes, please.
Sorry. KB, just to put a little context around the comments that you made and the concerns, if you look historically at how Missoula developed, like many other cities in the United States, we basically turned our back on the river, and it was a garbage dump. I mean, it was where we disposed of our waste. We've slowly reclaimed a lot of downtown. But if you look at what went on where the Wilma is, for instance, it used to be a salvage yard. Where we're trying to develop Riverfront Triangle, it was the city dump. And I think, this area that we're looking at today didn't develop a whole lot differently. The uses that you find along there, both on the east end of Broadway and on the west end of Broadway, basically all turned their back on the river. And so, I think that by looking at this type of new development along that area, this city will never turn its back on the river again. We're going to embrace the river, but you just kind of chip away at it piece at a time. And this is an opportunity, because of the amount of property that the city controls in this, kind of multi-block area between Broadway and the river. We have some unique opportunities to maybe take a bigger bite out of turning that paradigm around to where we're embracing the river and not turning our back on it and putting the backside of Eastgate is a perfect example. What a horrible face on the river that is, behind Ace Hardware and Albertsons, and it's just, but it's typical. It went on all over this country, and we're slowly but surely reclaiming the river.
Yeah, and I'm all for it, and I'm here to do whatever I can to help spread the vision.
And I'm super glad to have you here. It's good to hear your voice.
All right, thank you.
So encourage, these are everyone that, these is all on the website. So please take a look and send us your comments online on these specific strategies. They're based on the big ideas, building the next great neighborhood center, being a good neighbor and respecting the local businesses currently on site, connecting to the river and completing the path system, solving affordable housing and commercial space affordability issues, and creating a unique entry experience into Missoula's urban core. We'll be collecting comments, and the sooner you could get them to us, we'll be able to make some edits and tweaks to these things before we get the plan out for adoption. I think we'll do, it's a small group, but nonetheless, let's go ahead and do one last poll out of my curiosity. Again, if you're already logged in, you don't have to log in again. But to send your answer, you send a text message to 22333 and your answer. So just curious, I know it's just a few people here, but do you still think the draft plan is on the right track? If you don't feel like answering it, don't worry about it. these results are, we don't know who's sending them. We don't know who submits them. They're anonymous. So if you're not comfortable doing it, it's fine. But just to keep with our asking this question at our meetings so we know which direction we're moving in. A for yes, B for probably yes, C for can't tell yet, and D for no. After this, I will send it over to Annette to talk about the next steps in the process. Right, still have a big mix, and the planning process is not over. And urge anyone who hasn't had a chance to look through the plan to look through it and send us your thoughts on specifically what are the things that gives you concern. Right. Again, we're presenting this draft, and the plan will still continue over November and December with additional meetings. So pass it to Annette. I think you're on mute.
Yep, I sure am. Thanks, Rob, and thanks everybody for participating this evening. It's been helpful. I know a lot of you folks have been involved in the process for quite some time now, and it really has been helpful to have your input. And I know that you've contacted neighbors and you've gotten input from other folks. And I want to assure you that we have been listening to the input that has been coming in. Do please keep in mind that this is a plan. And it's a master plan. It's still pretty broad. It's more specific than it had been, but it's still pretty broad. And there are still a lot of details that will get worked out as it goes into the implementation process, as you get into a more refined site planning process and building process, the nitty-gritty of exactly how many parking spaces and where they go and what they look like. Those things still just have not been worked out yet. So keep in mind that there's still a lot of space to cover as this gets refined. So I want to just go through quickly the next steps for this particular plan. We are, what Rob talked through this evening is a final draft of the master plan, and we'll continue to get comments and we'll refine, but we're getting pretty close to buttoning it up. It will go through a formal approvals process because this will become an amendment to the downtown master plan, which is an amendment to the city growth policy, which is a land use policy that is required by state regulations. So those of you who participated in our October session, we talked a little bit about master planning and sort of that framework and legal process that master planning goes through. So the approvals process that we're going to go through on this plan, because the Business Improvement District, the BID, is one of the funding agencies, we'll take this plan to them for adoption, requesting that they adopt it on November 16th, next Wednesday. And that meeting is at 3 o'clock. These are all public meetings that are listed on this list here. Then next Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we go to the planning board and make a presentation, and they will open a public hearing, a formal public hearing. And we're asking the planning board to adopt the plan. They sort of kick off the formal process with regard to formally adopting it as an amendment to the downtown master plan. We also submit to City Council, and it will get assigned to the Land Use and Planning Committee, and that it will be considered at the Land Use and Planning Committee on November 17th. That's there will be a presentation. They probably will open it up for comments. It's not a formal public hearing, but that kicks off the city council process. On November 18th, we'll take it to the MRA board. MRA also is a funding agency for this project. And we're leading the project management. That meeting is from 12, it starts at noon on the 18th, and they always open for public comment if people have comments that they'd like to provide. The evening of November 18th, the Neighborhood Forum has asked us to do a presentation about the plan. That's at 6 o'clock, and that I believe is a public meeting. The City Council will have a public hearing on December 6th. That's a formal public hearing. And then I think they'll hold that hearing open for a week. And then the intention is that on December 13th, the City Council will be asked to make a final action. And then if the City Council adopts it as an amendment to the downtown master plan, then that finalizes the process. Funding partially was provided from the Big Sky Trust Fund, so we'll kind of get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and make a submission to the Big Sky Trust Fund. And that will conclude the plan. I anticipate that next spring, we will regroup and consider how do we start moving forward on implementation. Some of that's opportunistic. Some of that depends on developers that come forward. So we can't, I think it's still pretty open-ended with regard to specifics on that. But I do not expect that this is a plan that will get put on a shelf and forgotten about. That's it with regard to next steps. I just reiterate that these are all public meetings, so people are certainly welcome to come and make comments at any of these meetings if they'd like to.
Great, thank you, Annette. We're getting close to 7:30 Mountain Time, so I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. But if anyone has any last comments or questions they'd like to ask now, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, feel free to send us an email, myself or Annette, or comments through the website. I'd like to hear from you all as we move forward over the next 2 months.
So thanks, Rob. Thanks, Annette. Great job. Thanks to all of you that participated.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. And tomorrow morning, this presentation will be put up onto the project website. So if you want to listen again or send it to your friends or neighbors who weren't able to join us tonight, please do so. So they have a chance to also hear the same things and can send us additional questions. So thank you again, everyone, for all the time that you've been putting in and spending multiple hours with us tonight. And we appreciate it. And we want to see this plan advance and evolve and be implemented, and whether it's affordable housing or changes to West Broadway or whatever is your main goal, the more support this plan has from you all that live there, work there, or care about the neighborhoods, the better chance those things are of happening, and happening in a way that is reflective of the plan and what you would like to see. So thank you again, everyone.